What's going on, guys? Tower number 9 here. My voice is, as you can maybe hear, still not 100%, but back to making some videos here. And today we're going to have a preview of the Take the Initiative League Season 0.5 Top Cut. This is a tournament that is going to be held with the top 16 from Season 0.5 of the league. And the tournament game should actually begin today. I believe the first games are going to be played today, and some may be streamed as well, so we'll have to see how it goes. It's not going to be all in one day as we've had with some previous tournaments. I don't think there was a single day that worked for everyone. Instead, it's going to be more of a league format where players are going to get their games in independently. That being said, let's take a look at this. So we're looking at the bracket here. So round one, we have Poem on Mono Boba. So that's going to be Double Cunning Boba versus Copycat on Iden Green. And so we can take a look at the specific lists too. Let's see here. So here's Poems List. This is a double cunning boba. It's incorporating the new Bib Fortuna and generally has kind of a lot of the, sort of tempo oriented plays that you might expect from that type of deck, including all three of the double yellow cards. Bodhi, Rook, the Cantina Bouncer, and Cunning. I think the general agreement among people who have sort of analyzed the card pool is that of the double aspect cards, Cunning kind of got the strongest ones. Some of the other double aspect cards, especially the units and stuff, are considered very situational. So, like Pong Krell, for instance, I think is not normally considered a very strong card in double command. But all the double cunning cards are pretty solid. So, it's kind of what you'd expect. You get a lot of cunning tricks. He is running 3 Change of Heart main deck, which is interesting, kind of giving him more of a late game opportunity, maybe against some of the decks that are running more powerful end game units. But yeah, he is running, and interestingly, he is running Bib Fortuna, but is not running Jabba the Hutt. So, we'll have to see. We'll have to see how this ends up working out for him. And he is running Jeddah City. In fact, a little spoiler for the rest of this. I believe actually every player in this league is running the 30 HP. I'm sorry, is running the ability base. I think we don't have any 30 HP bases. Okay, so then the opponent here. I'm going to zoom in on these a bit. Holmes' opponent here is going to be Copycat, who is running a Command Iden build. As Command Iden builds go, this looks comparatively straightforward. Interestingly, it has 2 copies of Resupply and no third one. Sideboard's Traitorous does have does have Rook in main deck, 2 copies of Gideon. Yeah, it's an Iden Green list. Avenger and Reinforcement Walker at the top end, plus Darth Vader. Not playing Count Dooku, who has seen a fair amount of play. And actually, the sideboard has an even heavier. Uh, it's kind of interesting. The sideboard has an even heavier endgame ship package with 2 more copies of Avenger and 2 copies of Devastator. He's also running his Vanquish's main board, so this one's definitely tooled for the later game. Looking at these lists, I think that Poem is going to have the advantage at least at first, because I think he's going to be able to play aggro and sort of get the advantage on Copycat there. We'll have to see. We'll have to see if that continues being the case after sideboarding and so on. But Copycat's list looks very skewed for late game. On the plus side, those Vanquishes are a good potential counter to Fett's Fire Sprays. They're not terrible, even though this is a matchup where uh, I think you want to be playing faster stuff. Okay. So then looking at the next matchup, we have Astrotech on Boba Green versus Faith on Krennic Green. So Astrotech, Boba Green, 3 resupplies main deck. That's interesting. So maybe not as concerned about some of the aggro builds as some of the other things have been. Sorry about that, guys. Somebody sent me a text or something there. I'm going to turn this off so you guys don't hear any more noises like that. Okay, so then we have yeah, this looks, fairly standard Boba Green inclusions. We do have the 2 Steadfast Battalions main deck. That's been a popular tech card recently. I think originally people were talking about that as a counter to other Boba decks. But the one thing that really surprises me about this build is there's no copies of Shoot First. I think Shoot First is a very strong card. So it's interesting to me that Astrotech is not playing it. I think it's a very strong card, especially with Boba getting his resource back for it. And interestingly, he also has the option to He also has the option to sideboard into heavy late game stuff with cards like Reinforcement Walker, uh, Relentless, which is a great shutdown. Relentless is a weird one, so compared to some of the other end game ships, it's not as strong, but it blanks the first event the opponent plays each turn, so it's an excellent counter to things like Vanquish and Change of Heart, stuff like that, unless the opponent has some small event to play beforehand. Interestingly, two copies of the Emperor's Legion in sideboard. That's a card that returns units to your hand that were defeated this turn. Um, Not a card that I commonly see, and I'm curious what its use is in this deck. We do also have the main boarded Consortium Star Viper, which is I guess a concession to anti-aggro. Um, Consortium Star Viper is a really weird card because it's very bad, but specifically against Rebel aggro, it's a very useful card to have. So it has this niche where it's seen substantial play despite being a notably weak card because the thing that it's good at is good against a type of deck that's pretty popular in the meta. So that's kind of an interesting scenario if you ask me. Just having something like that as a card that exists in the game. And then Faith playing a Villain Green Krennic. I think this is going to be maybe the third tournament that he's played a Krennic build in. Second or third, maybe, I'm not sure. Once again, we see some main decked Star Vipers. So definitely, I think people kind of hedging their bets against aggro with these Star Viper inclusions. Though Blue Green also suffers from having extremely poor space presence in general. Um, it, uh, it's not really that build's forte. So it's possible that he just wants to have those anyways, having some extra space, and then lots of heavy stuff. Two Dooku, three Vader, two copies of Reinforcement Walker, two copies of Devastator, Super Laser Blasts, Academy Defense Walker. Um, so definitely a deck where I think he's hoping to ramp into his late game, and against this Boba deck that's also maybe doing some ramping stuff. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. I think Astrotech might be at a bit of a disadvantage here. I think he wants to be the aggro, and I'm not sure this is the most aggressive build that I've seen just with the different things that he has there. So I'm not entirely sure. I would probably give the edge to Faith on this one, just in terms of it seems like this isn't a super fast Boba deck, and it's going against a control deck that has a lot of tools to deal with it. Um, we'll have to see how it goes. Next up, we have Thork playing Boba Green versus Destiny Riku on Leia Red. That's funny. So Thork played Vader in a previous event and he won an early tournament with Vader. Then there was another tournament where he was playing Vader but was defeated by aggro. I think he said that he thinks Vader is quite good, but that he is reticent to play it given the amount of aggro that we're seeing in the environment right now. Okay, so this build, he has Tarkin Town. No, or I'm sorry, he has Traitorous. He doesn't have Tarkin Town. Going with the heavy resupply stuff. Um, he is running one copy of Shoot First with more on the sideboard. He has his Star Vipers also in the sideboard. Traitorous, Change of Heart, Reinforcement Walker is a heavy hitter. Overall, an interesting build. I believe he's going up against a very aggro deck. Yeah, that's right. So Destiny Riku has been a Rebel aggro player for some time, especially with Leia, and is running a version of his Leia aggro here. Um, Looking at this deck, we see a very high density of heroism cards in order to enable for a cause I believe in for high reliability. It should be very reliable here because I think we only have three non-heroism cards, one copy of Infiltrator Skill, two copies of Academy Training. I know that Destiny is a big fan of buffing Leia once she deploys, so like Academy Training on Leia or like Wing Leader on Leia are plays that he really likes to make. But I think unfortunately for him, those are going to be weaker plays against a Boba deck that has cards like No Good to Me Dead and other methods for potentially dealing with Leia more directly. So, we'll have to see how it goes. But I would probably give the edge on this one to Thork. Though, we'll see. It's possible he could be overwhelmed early on, but Traitorous I think is also maybe going to hit hard. In game one, Thork doesn't have his Consortium Star Vipers in, but he also has Traitorous, and Destiny does not have the Disabling Fang Fighters in main deck. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Overall, I would probably give the edge to Thork on this one, but we'll have to see. Next up, we have another Rebel aggro deck, and this is actually a Rebel aggro mirror. We have Loco Ivan, who is playing Cunning Sabine, versus You Can Call Me Al, who's playing Command Sabine. So this should be pretty interesting. So the different Sabine builds, um, Loco Ivan. Huh. Anyway, the different Sabine builds are kind of interesting. Jeddah City, so Cunning Sabine was sort of one of the classic setups and has been used for some time. And this deck is combining that with some, but not all of the new cards. Most notably, there's three out of aspect Rebel Assaults in this deck. Rebel Assault can be a very strong card for Sabine. Playing it out of aspect, I don't think is insane. Playing three out of aspect and no gorilla attack pods, that I'm not sure about, but maybe he's thinking that he's just not going to resource up to six. We do see General Dodonna played here on the high end, but the high end is four, which is sort of a classic tactic for these Sabine builds. Uh, it'll be interesting to see how this one goes. Uh, Loco Ivan's Cunning Sabine, also on Jeddah City. Um, in the previous season, the 30 HP base had become, I think, more used rather than Jeddah City for Sabine builds, and the reason for that was simply that the 30 HP base. The reason for that is simply that the 30 HP base was better in the aggro mirror, so I do think there's a fair chance Loco Ivan will wish he had the 30 HP base here against You Can Call Me Al, but we'll have to see. You Can Call Me Al is on Command Sabine, so he's playing that same Rebel Assault, but he gets to play it in faction. And so he is playing the attack pods, and he's also actually playing the new U-Wing reinforcement, which should be interesting to see in action. Um, so this is a list with some of the latest tech, whereas this is kind of the old standby. And I think that Loco Ivan, interestingly, only two surprise strikes. I think surprise strike is 3x for this sort of build, but could be wrong. No heroic sacrifices here for Al either, which is also interesting. Sometimes that card's used as a replacement for surprise strike. Maybe Rebel Assault's sort of in that role. Of these two, my initial read would be that Loco Ivan is more aggro and is going to want to be the beatdown, and You Can Call Me Al might end up being the control here, just based on the compositions of these two decks. And You Can Call Me Al has more late game stuff, has a Sentinel by way of the Echo Base Defender, and so on. Of course, we'll have to see how that goes. You Can Call Me Al also running Wolf main deck. Good counter to healing builds, though. When you're up against a Sabine mirror, that's not the most useful, but Wolf's 3/2 stat line is still good for trading with cards like Sabine Explosives Artist, Battlefield, or Battlefield Marine, though, of course, You Can Call Me Al is going to be the only one playing Battlefield Marine, I believe, in this matchup. Okay, so then next up we have Kotto versus Kissan. Kotto, interestingly, playing Grand Inquisitor here, Blue Inquisitor. This is a deck people have been talking about for a while, but it hasn't been seeing a huge amount of play. And this is, I think, maybe one of the first times we're seeing it in a tournament, at least with some of these newer cards in it, like Baze Malbus. He's canonically sort of Chirrut's bro, and they hang out, and not literally brothers, but they hang out and fight together and so on. But in a kind of ironic twist, it seemed like Baze Malbus's best use was actually in a Grand Inquisitor build rather than with Chirrut himself. So we are seeing that Baze Malbus in here. Gideon Haskin here as a 1x. Both of the smaller Inquisitors. Guardian of the Wills also in here as an early Force unit. 3 Fallen Lightsabers, Force Lightning, and Force Throw. A lot of Force type synergies in this build. We also have some copies of Bombing Run, Takedown, System Patrolcraft, and Make an Opening in the sideboard. But I think this is an interesting build, and I'm going to be curious to see how it does. Force Throw can be a very high impact card in the right situation. Total's opponent's going to be Kissan, I believe, who is oops. Actually, that's good. Let's leave that zoomed in. I like that. Kissan is going to be playing a Boba Energy Conversion Lab, just classic Boba Green. Only 2 resupplies here instead of 3. Is playing Confiscate in the side. No Consortium Star Vipers in main, but they are in the side. Cell Block Guard inside. Change of Heart in the side. 3 Steadfast Battalions main deck. Interestingly, playing 3 copies of the Frontline Shuttle, which has been kind of a controversial card. I know some people rate it highly. I know Thork, for instance, rated it very lowly in his card rating video today. So that's a controversial one. I've seen Kisan use it, and I actually think it has some good play. But we'll have to see. Overall, it'll be interesting to see how this one goes. I think that I think Kotto is probably the more aggressive or combo-oriented build with this, whereas Kissan probably wanting to be a bit more controlling, and it's going to be interesting to see how that ends up working. Um, if Kissan can get set up and get ready for a steadfast battalion as soon as Inquisitor deploys, he can potentially set up a board state where he can deal with that guy very easily. So that is going to be a potential obstacle for Kotto, but Kotto has some tricks of his own with Force Throw, Force Lightning, various other effects, and it'll be interesting to see what happens in this matchup. I'm excited to see this one when the time comes. Next up, we have Lev versus Wu. So Lev running a classic aggression Leia. So this is going to be, he is running Rebel Assault, which I personally think is a little redundant with Leia's ability, but could be wrong. Is running Heroic Sacrifice. Got the benthic two tubes in there. And this is a much cheaper cost curve than some of the other stuff that we've seen, ending on 4. He does have some more expensive stuff in the sideboard, so we see Black 1, Gorilla Attack Pod, and actually the U-Wing reinforcement as well, but all in sideboard. I think the main plan is to attack very aggressively. And once again, high density for a charge, though not quite as high as some other builds. I think he has 6 non-heroic cards in there with the 3 Partisans and 3 copies of Benthic 2 Tubes. Okay. And Wu, his opponent, is running an Iten green deck, and it's a really interesting deck because he has a large number of cards with less than max copies, including 3 different 1Xs in main deck and a lot of 2Xs. So looking at this Consortium Star Viper main deck, I think that is pretty dubious, but I think in this matchup, he's going to be happy that he has it. That Star Viper is great against Rebel aggro in space. It's really one of the more important cards you can have there. 2 resupplies and 3 super laser techs. 3rd resupply in the sideboard for those longer games. Avenger, Reinforcement Walker, Vader, Dooku, giving him some strong late game options. Can opt in Devastator, and actually the cheeky Galactic Ambition in the sideboard as well. Not entirely sure what matchups that's for, but Galactic Ambition plus Devastator or Avenger can potentially be pretty nasty at the cost of doing a lot of damage to yourself, but could be good to try and get an early advantage in like control in a control mirror or similar. Not entirely sure. I'd have to talk to him more about how he'd be using that exactly. But very interesting build here, wide variety of cards, and overall, I don't know. I think he probably does have the tools he needs to deal with this aggression, but there's going to be a question about whether he sees them. A lot of these really late game cards are going to be kind of bad or redundant uh, against a Leia aggro build, I feel. Um, so he'll probably want to sideboard in, but he has a sideboard with some very relevant things. He can sideboard in Colonel Yularen, make an opening. That's definitely some stuff that he can add in place of some of the more expensive units that are unlikely to see play. Um, yeah, should be an interesting match. I'm probably rooting for Iden here. Iden's a favorite leader of mine these days, but yeah. So next we have myself. I'm also playing Iden, but I'm actually the only player playing Iden Red, which is interesting. So my personal belief is that if you're wanting to play blue-green villainy, you should play Krennic, and if you're wanting to play blue-red villainy, you should play Iden. I could be wrong, you know. I'm evidently a minority here in terms of we have 3 Iden greens, and I'm the only Iden red. But basically, this deck has a huge amount of removal and some strong late game pieces to try and get control of the game after hopefully stalling out their early game with the removal and other effects. So I have, I'm not using Avenger main deck, but I did put it into the sideboard, thinking that it might be useful to have against some of these other major control decks. And it seems like that might be good because there are some pretty late game decks in the pool where I would want to have that Avenger in there. Overall, though, this deck with red, you don't have access to Vader, but you do get Emperor Palpatine and Ruthless Raider, which are nice. Imperial Interceptor is a nice boon in the space arena. Force Choke, great early removal. Open Fire, and then the Death Star Stormtrooper for another early unit that fights well against some of the threatening early units like Battlefield Marine. I am on 3X making opening main deck. I think it's really good right now. Yeah, we'll have to see. We'll have to see how I do. One note is I had been running Del Mico for a while, but I sadly cut him. I like the idea of Del Mico. The lore behind Del Mico is cool, but 3 cost 3/3 with very situational abilities. I don't know. I found myself thinking I'd rather just have the cell block guard in that slot. Sometimes Del's great, but I wasn't sure there was a spot for him. We'll have to see how that goes. Okay, so that's my Iden Red test, and I am playing against Vika here. Vika, my mistake. Vika playing Vader Green is running the Force package here. Interestingly, running Seventh Sister. who I tend to think is a weaker card, except in an Inquisitor build. But I think in this case, Seventh Sister and Fifth Brother are here to support Force Lightning and Force Throw. We have three Vader's lightsabers, none of the Fallen lightsabers, Forced Surrender here for some potential huge card advantage in the late game. Very strong card if it gets going. And also some big late game presence and can sideboard into more of it. This should be interesting. This is probably a comparatively slower deck. And it'll be interesting to see how we do. I think personally this is not the type of deck that I'm most excited to play with my Iden Red. I think I'm most interested in playing against mid-range builds, and some of the aggro builds. So this could be a more difficult matchup for me, but we'll have to see. The really force-heavy Vader decks do suffer from needing your force stuff to stick on the field for Force Throw to be an effective card and for Force Lightning to be an effective card. So insofar as I can deal with the Fifth Brother, Seventh Sister, stuff like that, I'll be able to have some of these effects be a lot less effective against me. But will I be able to do that? Hard to say. And the Forced Surrender there is an interesting card that I think is maybe going to provide a lot of power in the late game if it can be activated effectively. The card advantage you get from that is huge, although it does have a timing disadvantage of you having to damage the opponent first, and so that's kind of negative. And then additionally, it basically takes your whole turn, but the potential 4-card swing off one card is pretty big. Okay. So that is Vika's deck, and like I said, not the type of thing that I'm most excited about running into with Iden, but we'll have to see how it goes. And then last but not least, we have an Iden versus Krennic matchup with Rebel Trader versus Droson. So Rebel Trader, the host of this league, shout out to Rebel Trader for running this. Rebel Trader is running a command Iden, also with a lot of cards at non-max copies, some Devastators in there, 2 copies of Out of Aspect Vigilance, which is interesting to me. I think that's presumably an anti-aggro tech, but I tend to think Make an Opening is better in that role. Could be wrong though. That could end up being an impactful card. Maximum Ramp Suite. Once again, the main deck Star Viper. And we see Gideon Hask, we see Rook. 2 copies of the standard ATST. It's an interesting card. So ATST has a interesting relationship right now with the Steadfast Battalion. So if you have your leader out, Steadfast Battalion is like a better ATST that's also cheaper. If you do not have your leader out, which is more normal, then the Steadfast Battalion is basically a worse ATST that costs 1 less. Rebel Trader here has opted for the classic ATST, which I think is somewhat more reliable, though lower upside in the dream scenario. It doesn't hit that 7 power breakpoint that the normal ATST can get. But we'll have to see. Dooku, Vader, Reinforcement Walker, Avenger, Devastator, another deck that came loaded with a lot of late game cards. And then over here we see Drosan running the Krennic ECL. So that is going to be probably a pretty strong build along similar lines actually to Rebel Trader's build. It's kind of funny, they're both playing these builds. It's just Drosan's on Krennic instead of Iden. But interestingly, he's not running some of the cards that I think you run Krennic for. So like I'm not seeing the Emperor's Royal Guard here, which I think is a great card for Krennic and a lot harder for Iden to support. And one of the reasons I think that Krennic Green is better than Iden Green. But it looks like he's opted for a 2-drop suite that doesn't support the Emperor's Royal Guard. So even though Krennic does, the rest of his stuff does not. He has a actually probably smaller end game here than his opponent, interestingly. Um, might be able to get some good value off of Traitorous because Rebel Traitor has no attachment control in main deck or sideboard. Um, but the targets in an Iden deck aren't the best. The best case scenario is probably using Traitorous to steal an opposing Super Laser Tech, which is an incredibly strong play if you can pull it off. Or maybe Seasoned Sword Trooper Consortium Star Viper, but it's not the optimal. It's not like the Yoda with Jedi lightsaber type thing that you're maybe going for. So could be interesting here. So here we see about 12 late game units. And here we have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 13 late game units, but the Devastator is kind of the final word in that, and Drosan doesn't have it, including inside. Um, Also has fewer copies of Vanquish available. It's sort of interesting here. He has a ton of healing in his sideboard, including both Repair and Devotion, which are very healing focused cards. I kind of think that, yeah, it's interesting. I kind of think, even though I tend to prefer green Krennic to green Iden, I kind of think Rebel Trader's deck might be favored here, as I think his endgame is going to end up being stronger, and neither of these decks is very aggressive, but who's to say? We'll have to see how it goes. So yeah, then there's a quick stat breakdown at the end of this post. So four Bobas, three green, one mono yellow, four Idens, three green, one red, two Krennics, they're both green, two Sabines, two Leias, one Vader, one Inquisitor. So I think we've seen a big shift in the meta. So previously we saw, mid-range was fairly popular, and we're now moving towards more control decks with these Iden and Krennic builds. In fact, so if we say that the Boba decks are mid-range, and Sabine and Leia are aggro, we have four mid-range, four Sabine and Leia decks, which are more aggro. Then we have four Idens and two Krennics and a Vader, which are pretty control oriented. So something like seven control decks, four mid range, four aggro, and then Grand Inquisitor, who I'm not entirely sure, quite frankly, how to classify, since I don't know just how it's how that one's being played. So overall, very interesting as usual. The ECL is the most popular base by far. I think it is the best base in the game and arguably one of the best cards in the game. This time, nobody's on a 30 HP base, which might be music to the ears of the Sabine and Leia players. But um, yeah, this should be an interesting event. We'll have to see how it goes. I'm hoping that I can uphold the honor of Iden Red here. And you know, there's a fair mix of decks. We have seven different leaders, I think, and we now some of the old standbys aren't represented. Nobody's playing Luke. Nobody is nobody's playing Luke. Nobody's playing like some of the cheer red stuff that people were experimenting with earlier. Definitely seems like it's a bit control skewed. But we'll have to see how it goes. And I do note that of the control decks, six of them are Iden or Krennic, who both have a lot of healing to offer, which really helps them deal with the Rebel aggro builds that are a big problem for some of the more traditional controller ramp decks like Vader. So something to consider there. If you are playing control, I think playing with that healing package to give you a better game against aggro is a good way to do it. I do currently think Iden is probably the premier control deck, which I suppose is as represented by these lists, and I would probably put Krennic as number two. So overall feels pretty in keeping with shifts in the meta, with people now targeting mid-range, playing more control, and we'll see how that goes and whether the aggro cohort is going to be able to take advantage of that, or whether these control decks with strong healing are going to be able to push through. All right, guys, so that is the Take the Initiative Season 0.5 Top Cut preview. And yeah, that's going to just about do it for this one, guys. Thanks to you all for watching, and I believe the first games of this tournament are going to start being streamed today. So stay tuned for more, and I will give some updates as things go on. Hopefully stream some of those games myself and or be streamed playing myself, and we'll see who makes it to the finals. Also, just a little FYI, it is possible to create a bracket prediction here if you want to. I'm going to have a link to this, and you can try and fill out a bracket, just like let's say I'm going to pick myself to win. So I'm going to just click on myself at every point. You can just click here to add click on the names or drag and drop to add participants to the brackets. Let's say I think Rebel Trader will win there. And if you want to do this, there is some bragging rights to having the best bracket at the end of the tournament as well, and that is open to anybody, not just the players. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this one. Thanks to you all for watching. We will be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will catch you guys later.